in this session today, it's an open conversation, and just a couple of just administrative things. If we can all have our mic on mute, and feel free to have your video on and so forth. But if you want to ask a question, there is an option on your computer or your iPad or whatever device you're using to raise your hand. And I'm just going to show you. There's my raised hand. Can everyone see my raised hand? Just like that. And we'll see that. And so Maurice will see that come up in the, against the people. And then what we'll do is that we'll have moments, and Blair, we're going to be in your hands. We'll just pause and let those questions come through, and we'll just do them in the order as they pop up. So that way we can have a really good conversation and keep the flow going, and make sure that everybody has a voice. So we've got quite a bit of time. We're not going to rush. We really want to explore and discuss and give everybody the chance to talk about, what they feel and what they're inspired with. But Blair, this is very much, going to be led by you. So I would say that, we're very lucky to have Blair. Like many amazing relationships, both here and elsewhere, it's either through recommendation or through the magic of LinkedIn dating that we find each other. Anthony and Blair had a wonderful date on LinkedIn, and it went really well. And there was this incredible synergy, and especially with the work that Blair's been doing. So instead of, normally everybody knows I like to do a bit of a wingman kind of conversation and to introduce everyone. I feel that your background has been so extraordinary, Blair, that I wouldn't want to take away. Do you know what I mean? I wouldn't want to, lessen that. So if I can just welcome Blair and just ask you, Blair, maybe to give a bit of introduction of yourself, the things that you want to cover with
Sure.
About your background and why you're here. And Anthony wants to say a few words. He wants to do the wingman. So I'll go to Anthony first, and then we'll pass over to Blair.
I don't do the wingman. I half had my hand up because I wasn't sure that you were going to introduce Blair and some of the things you've done, which might be important for others to know. Blair, I know that you were head of PR for The Body Shop globally. I know that you were in charge of communications for Greenpeace. I know you did a whole range of things in between then and then being managing director of Capital Media, which is a media agency very, very focused on the environment and on sustainability. I know you've taken a role now as ultimate leader of an organization that looks after two very large funds that are both just extremely focused on sustainability, the environment, and how do we avoid extinction as a species. One of the things that really struck me so much, that really attracted me to you on LinkedIn and made me start following and commenting on it. It seems that you've got a heart of gold, but you've got a heart of steel as well. I've seen people criticism at you, and you just don't care, because I think you do care at some level, but the way you fight back and just carry on with the mission is just I know that you personally had an impact on the teal independence. And I'm not only in awe of what you do, I'm very grateful for what you do.
Thank you.
And to my kids and every other kid in this country and on the planet. So thank you for that, and thank you for being there.
Thank you so much. That's lovely. And such a nice thing to discover this group and all of you and have the chance to talk to you. My guess is if you have signed on to this particular episode of, Symphony 7's thinking, that you probably have all been through. There's difficult conversations or even attacks on LinkedIn or whatever, where you put forward your very positive position about where we should be going and thinking ahead, and you get, smacked down by somebody who says that's impossible or it's all a load of BS. And I think it's a moment in time where as a group of people that are focused on a purpose and a purpose-driven kind of future in whatever way that looks, for a bit of bravery, because business as usual is not going to solve our problem. Our problems, many, but climate is my particular interest and focus for the last, say, 18 years. It's going to take us really honestly having a conversation about what we have to do to bring about the changes we need. That's why I get attacked a lot, and that's okay, because I have seen a real change in the thinking. LinkedIn is maybe my most dramatic example of when I started experimenting with the kind of posts to put up on LinkedIn to challenge people to think about climate in particular. In the beginning, the pile on of deniers was just, it was extraordinary. And I knew that was going to be kind of the case in point, that's who that audience was. It was very business led, and Derek, excuse my referring to it as such, but it's very older white men who, many of them were senior in businesses, and their attitude was, you can't tell me anything new, and I'm not, if I haven't discovered this is a problem by myself, it's not a problem. And that attitude still exists in many, many camps, but the radical change I've seen in LinkedIn in probably the 8 years that I've really been experimenting on posting. And I just point to it because it's a good example for, I'm sure all of us have had some of these experiences, but now that's virtually gone. I mean, I might post something, get one person I don't know posting, the climate conspiracy or the cult. My favorite one is the climate cult, as if following science and listening to experts equals some kind of cult following, and you're disengaging your brain, following brainlessly. But that's all gone. And that's a real sign of, to be hopeful, I think, because that change has happened because a lot of difficult conversations have been had, a lot of different approaches about how to communicate things that people don't want to hear. And trust me when I tell you, nobody wants to hear that, we're damaging to the planet to the point where we're in real trouble for a future. It's a hard convo to have. So I just thought I'd kick off with that as why am I attacked? Well, look, I'm not alone in this bravery and in posting and fighting and having difficult conversations. But I think there are different levels of acceptance of that. It's not fun. People don't love it, especially when you're attacked personally, which I certainly was during the election campaign. It's now a bit of a badge of pride because I'm in a really interesting group of people that the Murdoch media have gone for. One nice story to tell you about this is that when that happened, I mean, first of all, it was a shock in the way that it happened, and I won't bore you with the details of it, but they couldn't go after me for my climate change campaigning and positioning because that was no longer acceptable at that moment in time in the election. It was the key issue driver. So they couldn't take me on that. So they found some other absurd, pluck something off of social media. Come to find out, there were 15 women, all women, who they went after, mostly all working independently, not in a big company that potentially was going to back a libel suit or whatever. But secondly, the number of the most incredible Australians who contacted me in the wake of that personally to say, really sorry it happened. I've been there myself. Is there anything I can do? It was spectacular. So if it gives you a little hope, the kind of, I'm talking about Simon Chapman, one of the legends of public health on cigarettes and smoking and tobacco, who's been attacked by the tobacco industry over and over and over again. Benjamin Law, who is an outspoken gay man who was at the time chair of the Sydney Festival and chose to step out of it because the taking of money through the Israeli, I think it was the embassy, was putting money up and just thought politically that was too difficult to stand with. People like on the Liberal side, Julia Banks, who was really just abused by her own Liberal Party, stepped out as an individual and as a woman. That famous scene when she gave her departure from the Liberal Party speech and all the men in the party got up, turned their backs and walked out of the room, bravery. This woman, and then she's written a book about it. Anyway, there were 15, 20 who I would think were some of the best, brightest and smartest people in Australia who contacted me around that. And it says a lot about what it takes to be those kind of stepping out leaders. So I would encourage you all not to be too fearful because all of us taking a little stand on important issues we care about, you're backed by some phenomenal people. And we should really do more, as you're doing here today, to connect up and stay in touch and support each other, because it's going to be an interesting journey as we continue on. We have a new government, we have a lot of opportunity, but there'll still be naysayers, and there's still the Murdoch media who will literally chink away every day at trying to question the progress we're all sort of seeking to put in place. So I just pick up with that, and I'll start, if you don't mind, some just quick slides to get us thinking, and I'm really interested in the discussion and all of your thoughts, both practical and just ideas and the like. Climate and capital media started in the wake of Trump, after Trump was defeated in the States, with the idea that the US, like Australia, had really been held back on the kind of investment opportunity side of climate solutions and all kinds of the kind of emerging tech that we're going to show and talk about in a minute. It's an unusual outfit. We're not a mainstream media outlet, and we are a campaigning media outfit for action, and it can happen in all ways. So, you know, it can be investment, it can be ESG and sustainability within companies. Our audience tends to be quite a diverse, eclectic. A lot of media follow what we do. And one of the reasons of that is the team behind it, and that my co-founder, Peter McKillop, was years and years bureau chief for Newsweek in Asia. So the team has a lot of experience in Asia, China in particular, and that's quite a different perspective on a lot of this stuff. Trying to access information about what's going on in Asia, but in particular in China around climate is a real point of difference. Plus, we try to cover trends versus stories. So we're looking at what are the bigger aspects of things that are changing, who are the innovators, where's the money moving, as opposed to just a single story on a company or on a particular project. And then I just started 3 weeks ago as director of philanthropy for Ethinvest, which is the oldest ethical investment boutique firm in the country. Amazing group. A subsidiary of Ethinvest is Australian Impact Investment. Is doing an amazing job on the impact space to really get great returns, but show that you can invest in impact and still be successful. So a lot of our clients in that space are charities with endowments or corpuses that they invest in order to give money away, as well as a lot of funds and wholesale investment people and companies. So it's been a really interesting learning curve for me. And in a minute, I'll just mention, I founded 350.org in Australia, and I'd say one of the most things I'm proudest of was a divestment campaign, which we started in 2010, 2011. It's well over 11 trillion that's been divested from fossil fuels. And at the time, it started out very much as kind of an ethical investment thinking approach, which was you do it because it was an ethically right thing to do, but it became quickly about money. And now obviously there are many reasons why people want to divest. It's not a great investment. Even we're seeing a short-term bump because of Russia, but the chances post-Paris that, you know, we'll go back to open-ended fossil fuels is virtually zero. So, you know, might get a cash investment take up from the short term, but generally it's not a great thing to stay in if you're, you know, a savvy investor. So if you don't mind changing the slide, just mention the divestment campaign, because the big question was after that, what next? Sorry, 40 trillion, my bad, forgive me. And I just looked it up the other day because I kind of looked at it on the slide and went, that seems like too much money. But I went back and discovered who it comes out of the US. They actually spent the outfit that did it actually did a chunk of research on it. I think about 3 years ago, and that's the figure they came to, really respected. So now it would be very hard to even pin down how much people are moving out. It's become pretty common that it's happening on a large scale in many places. But I just wanted to throw up, and I don't need to read them out, these 3 facts, quotes, figures that people have been using in the last, pretty much since COP26, just to talk about the size of the opportunity in what we're facing in terms of the vast global transformation from fossil fuels into all kinds of things that are low carbon, as well as renewable energy. There's whole systems management of how we bring about that change. So it's daunting. There's no doubt about how daunting it is to try and navigate what's going to end up on top, which things are going to work, which are not. Investing in it can be tricky, but I just think you can't ignore the sheer size of the opportunity. And it's great to just get your head around how much fun that is. Quite frankly, if you're interested in driving change, you can't not look at those 3 things and think it's pretty exciting. And it's a pretty exciting time to be alive, because the decisions we make in the next 3 years will determine really what happens to the planet. So I just give you those 3. There are many more like them, but those are the 3 that really kind of caught my eye and my ear when I heard or saw them, and need to be repeated a lot, because in the mainstream media, it's very difficult to get that feeling of the scale and the size of this change. I just want to mention before I go to the next slide that I got the real incredible opportunity to go work with the Google X team, who are the people under Alphabet who are doing moonshot projects. And in particular, worked with the team working on climate solution stuff. I can't talk a lot about the specifics, but suffice to say, it's extremely exciting. And this is just one example of dozens and dozens of very large companies that are looking to a range of big scale climate solutions. And they're moving fast, and their access to data, resources, and computation is so vast that it's worth changing the thinking from we can't do this stuff or it's going to be really hard and slow to that's probably not true. It's probably going to happen chaotically, but very quickly when technologies and innovations start to hit. So it's going to be a really interesting time to try and kind of keep up and follow how fast some of these things come online and the opportunities they provide and present as solutions. So just wanted to drop that in because I think it's exciting and it's fun and it's extremely hopeful. And so while it's often easy to get pulled down by the negative of the 115 degrees in Oklahoma this week and fires in Alaska, for instance, on the flip side, the opportunities that are coming about are really amazing. And, you know, the race is on. Can we do it fast enough? And I think that's where the moment we're sitting at. Next slide, if you would, thanks. So in some of our chats in the breakout sessions, a lot of these things were mentioned, and I just thought I'd throw them up with particularly the last square of disruptors. Not something often talked about, but really important because I think while we'll see a lot of the big companies back different technologies, what will surprise will be the small out-of-the-box types, particularly in the developing world, that are focused on different types of problems than we are thinking about in places like Australia. So I'll just give you one example, and I give it only in the sense of being able to sort of keep it in the back of your mind as things change, because some things will come from very surprising places and happen very fast. And the one I'm thinking about is an article that was written for us by Danny Kennedy. I don't know if many of you know Danny Kennedy and his outfit, which is New Energy Nexus. Out of California, but he's an Australian. I met him when he was 18 at the first Earth Summit. He's a force of nature. And if you haven't followed New Energy Nexus, keep an eye on them and just look at the projects that they back. Most of them in developing world, some in the US and elsewhere, but he wrote an article for us about 2- and 3-wheel EVs that when I read his article, like it was a penny dropping at maybe like overnight, the global economy will change, because in the developing world, EV cars are not the thing. What is the thing are small vehicles like EV bikes, EV motorbikes, and 3-wheelers being used for business and delivery and supply chain, as well as for personal use. We're not even looking at that much in the West, but the size of how fast this is going off in places like India is extraordinary. And things like battery swap companies. So you won't pull your 3-wheeler up and wait for it to charge. Instead, people will be using fast battery swap systems. And there are whole companies popping up with these swap systems. So I just mentioned that because it's disruptor companies out of places like India and Southeast Asia that are developing all this. And if you think about the sheer size of this as a growth area in the whole of the world, where transport without cars is largely the case in terms of public ownership, that they'll kind of skip past cars and go straight to these smaller, very easy, quick to charge and or battery swap systems. And the size of that economically as an opportunity is just massive. So I just, disruptors are a thing to think about and watch. And even here in Australia, what we're seeing, you know, are people that we've never heard of before, because our energy retailers, for instance, have been so slow to move. That things are, Octopus, for instance, coming to Australia is fascinating, worth a watch. They come with a brand name, very successful brand name out of the UK. They're very interested in Australia. And it's just, things are moving fast. It's interesting to see who's going to shake that up. And I also mentioned blue economy because it's something we don't hear a lot about in terms of climate, but it's very relevant to it. Regenerate ag, I know there are a few experts on the call. Tim, I think, is here. It's going to be critical that we kind of crack the move from very destructive kinds of agricultural farming and production to shifting to a circular and a long-term sustainable approach. Everything else you probably know about, but I just thought flashing that on the screen. These are some that I didn't even really go into the detail of systems management. It's going to be a massive opportunity, and needless to say, companies like Google and X are thinking about that because that's their wheelhouse of what they bring as a company. And how do you manage like smart grids and really smart grids? I mean, like when you're turning on and off literally all day long based on supply, demand, and access, and who's using what and where your energy is coming from. That sort of stuff is all coming online fairly quickly. So I just flash that on because it gives me some hope that a lot of good, smart people with a lot of money are starting to think about all of these things and how they can be in the game. Which brings me to the next slide, if you don't mind, which is how we're going to finance this stuff and make it happen. And it's very different than the way things have traditionally happened in the marketplace, which is someone comes up with an idea, they raise some money from investors. The investors expect extremely fast profits, or what I think is extremely fast profits generally. And if they don't get that profit, they get out, and often it'll fail or it'll be dumped onto something else. It may or may not succeed. That's changing a lot. So I mentioned things like the moonshot thinking of X and others going on all over the world. Green hydrogen is happening as a moonshot project in Germany, for instance, and something Twiggy Forest and other companies like Calex in Australia are part of that kind of different approach where governments are financing plus companies are exploring. It's just a different approach to problem solving than it is just about making money or coming up with a product that you're going to sell. Financial mechanisms out of COP26, much maligned, the COP26 outcomes. I actually am a bit of more optimist about what happened at COP26. There were 8 or 12 financial mechanism specific projects that came out of that were actually quite inspirational, really trying to move some difficult areas. That's exciting. Next one, COP27, see if we can financially have mechanisms for the developing world. That's probably the next big challenge, how we get money flowing into countries that are going to be hit hardest. Blended finance, not a new idea, but what we're seeing in a lot of places now is government philanthropy money plus investor money. And how that works together is very interesting. And often it's a patient capital approach. So the idea isn't I'm going to make a fast buck. It's I might be in this for 20 years or 15 years. And I'm happy with that. And I'll get a return, small along the way and bigger as we get successful. Which brings me to my favorite topic is the solution is the job. So the job isn't I go into the market because I want to make money and that's my career. The job is I want to solve climate change. So I'm going to look at all kinds of ways of being involved in projects. I'm not just going to put money in, I'm going to actively participate in driving the company or the innovation or the process by which we get something happening. I point to Mike Cannon-Brookes taking over AGL as the perfect example of the solution is the job. The asset manager behind that. That's not a smart investment, taking over AGL. That's I think we can fix this. I think it's going to be hard. I think we can show the world that we can transform this very coal-heavy company into a company that doesn't have to split and dump its coal assets and go bankrupt on that front. I think we can make the transition commercially. It's going to take time. I'm committed to doing that because I think it's an interesting and important thing to do. It's a very different definition of a job than being an investor, for instance, just an investor for money. I'm starting to see those people pop up all over and they're fascinating. Most of them, many of them are younger. Many are coming out of an IT background who have very different kinds of problem solving thinking. And I think younger and younger people everywhere are kind of going to begin to come at things like this because it's much more fun than just doing a 9-to-5 day job. Cooperation is going to be key. Global inclusion, where we start to think about how the developing world or the global South, as they're often referred to, are going to participate in these solutions and how we invest in them, how we bring them to the market, how they begin to be rolled out all over. And that's just setting our discussion up, I hope, for how do we do all this stuff in Australia? Because unfortunately, we're 10 years behind with a government that had zero vision about our role in all of this, not just in our region, but globally. Whereas I would say the amazing, surprising, frustrating flip side of that was we have all the innovation thinking, we have great educated population, and our new mantra which is why I started to work at F-Invest, was a lunch with the managing director, where we really, first discussion point was, why is Australia not the happiest country in the world? We have everything we need here to be the most amazing emerging economy as the world goes to low carbon than any other country in the world in terms of the resources, the opportunities, but we're going to need vision and leadership. And at the moment, it's pretty slow to be coming along. We're going to have to demand it and produce it ourselves. So when I say business as usual isn't going to cut it, that means all of us stepping up and demanding a lot more vision, a lot more structural thinking about how we bring this stuff online, and a lot more demanding an idea from the government that you're going to have to let off the chains and let us loose with incentives, with penalties, with, to hear that we're literally in a place after the election where almost every expert says we just are never going to get the carbon credits because it's politically untouchable. That's the Murdoch media talking. That's not any business person I've talked to in Australia. We have to get a market structure set up so that we can incentivize doing the right stuff. So we're going to have to force that. And I don't know how we're going to do it. So that's a good way to start a discussion. How do we get the government to do what we all know needs to happen? And let's get to it.
Amazing. Blair, I don't think in such a short amount of time, I've taken that many notes. My page is going. And most of the questions, I'll be honest, most of the questions, so I really appreciate it. I just want to if you have a question, please use the function on your computer, iPad, device, whatever you're using, just to put up your hand and we'll call you out in just 1 second. So just start, with your questions and comments. I think it's really amazing what you're saying, especially about the Murdoch media, and we're seeing the impact across not just media, but also large-scale businesses. Even Fortescue, we're seeing the Fortescue move, and there's a real shift. There's a real shift for sure. Sometimes we also have to ask the question around is it a single point solution, or is it one that actually takes into consideration the flow-on impact? For example, if we're using water, and we're destroying the water molecules to create hydrogen, what happens later as we start to really struggle with fresh water in the world, with the demand? So, and it's just, I don't have an opinion either here or there. I think that's, things that a lot of scientists are talking about, but I guess it's important to identify the multiple pieces that have to come together to make things work, and that broad thinking. That's why the discussion is so important, not just let's go all in onto this piece, because it makes just financial sense. That's what are the broader pieces. And I think that as we look at the funding models, and that's why I personally really value your input into this conversation. F-Invest has been making a real impact for many years. Many of the impact investment groups, investors, those especially playing in that field early, it's amazing how once you see the projects come to life, how quickly they pull out and actually say, hold on, I'm not sure if we really are up for this one, So it's either because of the political pressures, or maybe like you were saying, you have to wait a little bit longer, to see the benefits. Some of it is risky, but other technologies, and we work with many interesting people, and people like James McGregor's here, have seen many commercial ready technologies, even out of companies like CSIRO and universities and have you. They are investable and ready and fit into that landscape of change. But we see many of those impact investors, and I'll say it in quote marks because some are very much about, we want to do this for the branding because our shareholders want it, but actually we don't really support this. So we're seeing this shift. It's a real kind of development piece from media pushing, and from those who go, well, we have to do ethical investing, we have to do impact investing, but actually do we really want to? I think that's it's I really sort of pull that out from some of the things that you're talking about. Just, have you got an opinion on those, the broader landscape of the ethical, the impact investors, and what are the challenges that they're facing? And then we'll open up the questions. I saw Richard's already got his hand up.
Yeah, look, I don't work on the actual hands-on investment side and would never pretend to be an expert in that, but watching them work, yes, they have a really solid process about how they pick up a project and really analyze it as both as a risk, as an opportunity, what's the management like, what's the thinking, a lot of due diligence. It's really critical. However, they are also starting with a mindset that says we only want the stuff that's going to have positive impact. So that already eliminates a huge number of things and narrows down, what they're going to put their money in. I'd say, in terms of thinking about it, follow the ones that have had the longest success track record. The other thing I'd say is, by the nature of being impact focused, you have the automatic benefit of thinking ahead. So you're not locked down in the way that, for instance, someone mentioned Kodak in our discussion. You didn't get to a point where you said, right, well, that's what we do, and then we stop. If you're an impact investor, or you're an innovative project that's a technology, or even an approach, I would say it's that approach thinking, right? What's the next thing going to be to solve the next problem, the problem after that? And green hydrogen is a great case in point. By potentially unlocking that, we may potentially open up all kinds of other problems. Smart people will be thinking that 5 steps ahead, and that's the kind of thinking I was seeing going on at X. They're not thinking about just solving one problem. They're thinking about then what's the 5 after that we have to be ready for. And so the one word I remember at the changeover to the 2000s, just clearly in my mind thinking the theme of this century is complexity. And I raise that because all of these problems are highly complex, right? There's no one silver bullet solution to even one aspect of climate change, let alone the whole bigger picture. So it's the complex thinking that's necessary by all of us and the people we're going to work with, and the young people coming along behind us. The Murdoch media is not facilitating an understanding of what's required of complexity in solving a problem, right? So sure, you can attack me for being hooked on climate change as a driver, as an issue, as a problem. You can argue that it's happening faster, slower, or not at all. But case in point of climate change as an issue, you can't think about it without thinking about every other aspect of how we use energy, how we transport things, how the supply chain works, what are our risks. If extreme weather starts to happen, how does that disrupt everything we do? One of the alarming facts of the bushfires on the east coast of Australia was the unthought of aspect that one of the biggest problems was all the telco stations went down in those regions, and mobile phones were not accessible to people trapped in fires. Firefighters, firefighting coordinators couldn't communicate with each other. We didn't have a backup satellite set up for those people to work in an emergency. That's a single example of 1,000 things that went wrong because we just didn't think far enough ahead about what happens. So the Murdoch media cases, I'm using that, it's a stereotype, I know that, but it's the simplification of the Telegraph. And when I look at the front page, I just think, we're not doing humanity any favors here, folks. Everyone's going to have to get, to some degree, their head around living in a very complex world. Let's encourage education, thinking, not slamming each other and tearing each other down, even if we disagree. As you said at the start of this, we need to have some hard conversations. Let's assume people are coming to the table with good intent, even if we disagree. And let's remove those people and barriers that are not willing to come to the table with that kind of thinking, because it's not going to help us. So call it out when you see it. be brave to say this isn't good enough, we have to do better, and shut it down if it's doing real damage. And that's a rather extreme thing to say, but media ownership in this country is shocking to me as somebody who's come from the US and then lived in the UK. You cannot have Queensland's media entirely owned. This is, not online, just specifically hard copy media owned by Murdoch. And that's the situation we're in. 85% is owned by Murdoch. It's a risk and a liability to this country and to our democracy if we allow that to continue. So it's as much of a problem for all of us in the sustainability thinking front as it is, it has held us back for 10 years. And it's guaranteed, a government for too many years that just was not even protecting our economy, let alone thinking ahead on our behalf.
Imagine what it'd be like if the media ownership, especially in Australia, flipped. What this is the biggest problem, and we're going to support and make a difference. Wouldn't that be incredible?
Exactly.
Richard, you've had your wow. Thank you so much for being patient.
Thank you. Just a couple of comments. I think Blair as well. I mean, I think the Murdoch press should understand that even if they don't believe that climate change is real, which is fine, they can do what they like. We should be doing all this stuff with the technology anyway. That's exactly what I'm saying. So it makes no difference. Now, just a couple of things. Firstly, where are we up with green hydrogen? I thought that Twiggy Forrest hasn't even created 1 barrel of that yet. So that's the first thing. And the second question I've got is, I didn't quite get your explanation on the blue economy. Can you?
Oh, yeah, sorry, I skipped over that. Yeah, I'll do it quickly. Blue economy, all the kind of things you can do for sustainable oceans. I'll just give you like 2 quick examples and then you'll go, okay, I get it. One is a company, we did a series at Climate and Capital. So if you want to have a dip in, go to the blue economy, look 10 best, we did a list of 10. Aquatic robotics used for things like fish farming. So you can, instead of trying to, it's a complex thing to monitor is the fish farm healthy? Is the water going to be toxic, or are the fish suffering from too much heat? All that can be done with a robotic fish or a AI that goes into the environment and you monitor it literally minute to minute to minute. So you can understand whether your business is at risk of being contaminated, or it's also incredibly helpful after floods and cyclones. You can send this AI in to find out where problems are after a big, extreme weather event. The other example that I loved was, well, 2 quick ones, sorry, because they're both so lovely. There's a company in France bringing back sailing ships for use of literally delivering goods from place. So this is for high-end brands like Champagne that want to deliver carbon neutral champagne across the Atlantic, or Gucci, who wants to be a brand that is seen as a completely carbon neutral brand. They deliver their high-end fashion from the south of Europe to the north using a sailing ship. Now, there are loads of people who love sailing. They just love sailing, right? So if you can figure out your supply chain where you're not in such a hurry, you plan back, you're a Gucci designer, you've got fashion for the autumn that has to get from Italy, where it was made, up to Scandinavia. You just shoot back 3 months, produce your fashion line, and it arrives maybe 12 or 15 days later than it would if you sent it by, cargo ship or whatever your alternative, flying it, say. So that's another business. Loved that idea. A French guy who runs it, young, super keen, super successful. Like, it's growing very quickly. Never in Australia, never heard of it, right? But so what if you wanted to send goods from Sydney to Melbourne or up to Brisbane on a sailing ship? There will be brands who love that idea. I think it's great. The final one that's kind of maybe a little more techie is a company that has very smart AI hull cleaners for large cargo ships. And they meet the boat, say, out 25K from the shore. They attach the very smart AI, what I would call algae scrapers, but they do other things as well. By the time the ship is in port, unloaded and reloaded, the ship is then clean. And this takes the drag of the ship off, and it makes it incredibly energy efficient. So you're not losing efficiency to the drag that you get from extra algae on the ship. So those are a few examples of the blue economy and how it ties into climate. There are many, many others. And the question about green hydrogen, the surprising thing about green hydrogen is it's going to have a lot of problems, including transporting it. Twiggy's had 3 breakthroughs already. They're in a story I wrote for Climate and Capital. They're small breakthroughs, but they're not that small. So one of them is giant scale trucks on a mine site. They've cracked a technology that you can use green hydrogen to run these things instead of diesel fuel. That's not small, right? So it's early days, and I don't know the cost. Like, it could be cost extreme, like it could be impractical at this point. But they've announced 3 successful small parts of the green hydrogen story, and this was 8 months ago, maybe. So I wouldn't be surprised if they've cracked a few more. It won't be like, ta-da, now we got green hydrogen. It'll be, we got a little thing working there. It's going to be a process, and some things will never work, and some things will. The big hope is that it might work in some ways for airlines, or it might, for airline fuel alternative, or it might work for shipping, which is going to be a really tough nut to crack. Large container ship kind of fuel. Those are the 2 that people seem to think that's where it'd be most useful. I probably need to do a green hydrogen update myself in the next 2 or 3 months, because it just changes very quickly. I wouldn't even be able to tell you where to watch for this one. If others have good ideas of who's watching, who's doing what, most people aren't talking a lot about it yet because they're waiting to nail down their thing and then get it to the market. But we'll try to keep covering it in Climate and Capital, because it's just a fascinating emerging thing. I couldn't hand on heart tell you which one's going to work, what's not, if any of it's going to work, but certainly a lot of people are trying very, very hard. I was going to mention just one other thing in relation to that, which was I don't know if you saw this week, Rex Airlines, which is ironically the airline that most flies for mining, so coal and gas, is going to an electrified engine. And they announced this as an ABC story this week. I'll try and write it up next week for Climate and Capital. That's amazing to me. Now, I don't know how they're going to do this. This isn't a plug-in plane, but it's a part of their engine system they're going to electrify. And the head of the company said, this is the future, we're just going for it. So if that doesn't, I think of Rex as this kind of antiquated little, it's not Qantas, right? It's small, but think about the forward thinking of a little airline that kind of does more the puddle hopping, small, trips. Is moving to electrification, and they're doing it very vocally, and all of a sudden it's just an example of things will come out of surprising places. And I think for green hydrogen it might be one of those things. You just have to keep watching to see what it is that emerges as the real thing, and which things fall aside, and we'll never get there.
Thank you.
That's really great. Thank you, Blair. I just had to change devices. Sorry, it's all been a bit strange. I think that Tim, you also had a question. I think that's very relevant. There was a book that I read recently. It was recommended by, it's actually Lorraine. Remember Lorraine, when she joined our call, she recommended that we have a read of this book called Sand Talk. And just as you raised your question, Tim, it just made me remember just how profound I felt that book was. Tim, did you want to just jump on and just ask your question?
Yeah, sure. Thank you. So the question specifically for Blair, and anyone else who's curious, like to jump in, is can you explore your thinking around initiatives that centre in this country Aboriginal ways of knowing what you're doing, and then invite folk like us on the understanding that there's no one Aboriginal on the call to walk alongside those ways of doing, being, and knowing. I'll give a little bit of context to this. Convening an emerging regenerative initiative down here, speaking with Paul Hawken about this 10 days or so ago, who's very much centered Indigenous ways in his approach to regeneration. And we were kind of having a little light-hearted conversation, sub-conversation towards the end, and I basically said, in Australia, if you want to regenerate, basically, as a white person, what you need to do is get out of the way and enable Aboriginal to do what they were doing pre-colonization, appreciating that this is a new world and we're not going back to that. So yeah, over to you. If that's enough context for the question, over to you.
Yeah, that's a great line of thinking. Can't say I'm a big expert, but things like Fire Sticks, which is an Aboriginal group that does controlled burning. It's a you know, centuries and centuries old Aboriginal approach to managing land and fire in a country that is prone to fire, but certainly more prone now than ever before. And a lot of communities are bringing organizations like Fire Sticks in to help not just landowners, but communities look at where they could do small bits of control burning in selected parts to help manage the fire, break the fire, as it were, so it doesn't come flying through and take out everything. That's an example that is really great, and that's just one of the outfits. There are now dozens. After the fires, they sprung up everywhere saying, hey, you know, what about us? We know how to do it. You might ask us, we know a little about this. And that's starting to happen around Australia. Another outfit to watch is Karina Nolan's group called Original Energy, which is for Aboriginal energy projects on Aboriginal land, renewable energy projects, and how to fund that, and how to get community, the active mob involved in the management of setting up those projects. So check out Original Energy, and the other one is Seed Mob, which are the a climate activist group of all Aboriginal young people. It's interesting for a number of reasons, but one is in Aboriginal culture and Pacific Island culture, young people are not leaders without permission, and both in the Pacific communities and in Aboriginal cultures, climate change has been a real driver for young people going to elders to say, we want to lead on this issue in our community, and give them permission to do it. So Amelia Telford runs Seed Mob. They mostly fight fossil fuel projects that are going through Aboriginal land, like the one in the Northern Territory, the gas project up there. Really powerful bunch of, and really helping support leadership within Aboriginal communities to get actively involved in protecting country. So those are some of the things I know. I'm not a regen expert, and I'd love, Tim, if you would anytime jump in with who you think's doing it best, where, how, and how much of a tie-in is happening to local Aboriginal people where those projects are happening, because it's a great opportunity to shift the white people come in, take land, destroy it, leave the mess, to let's do this differently. Let's involve those around the project or whose land it was traditionally, and can we change the kind of thinking about how we think long-term to protect it and make it manageable over time and good for all.
Can I just speak a couple in now?
Yeah,
Please.
I'd love to hear.
Yeah, because I love what Victor Stephenson's doing with Fire Sticks. I think that's a fantastic initiative. And I think Suncorp put, I think it was 2.5 mil of funding in to really sort of bolster their track record. I think they're now employing 100 Aboriginal people as trainers and fire coordinators regionally. So just two others right now, since topic of carbon offsets has come up a couple of times. You can have a look at the Indigenous Carbon Institute. So they're basically vetting at the moment existing projects, and then they're looking to generate and basically sort of activate more carbon offset programs where there's a double gain, that there's a enterprise gain for Aboriginal communities and there's a cultural gain. So all of their offsets will be cultural practices that sequester or sort of manage carbon. And the other one, which is a little bit of a plug for a friend of mine, is Native Foodways. These guys have partnered with Lend-Lease to provide basically food stock to replant the roadside between the highway that somehow Lend-Lease are managing out to Badgerys Creek, the new airport in Sydney. So Native Foodways' premise is to restore Aboriginal agricultural practices, which do three things: sequester carbon, provide sort of cultural context and accessibility to First Nations and non-Indigenous people, and generate income for Aboriginal people through bush foods, because at the moment 2% of the economic gain of the bush foods economy is returned to Aboriginal people.
Great, that's fantastic.
Yeah, so
if you have
Parliament,
time, Tim, if you would stick them in the chat, the names.
Yep, I'll try and I'll get the website URLs. I'll put them in there.
Yeah, and thank you for sharing that. I really appreciate that. And so have a look in the chat. Those are there. Just see the communications and the links and so forth in the chat to sort of get more across that. Blair, we've got Peter. Peter, are you able to just sort of cover off your question? Around the industry and what it takes to succeed in the different sectors.
Yeah, absolutely. I know that there's many examples of companies that are now really starting to do good. Suncorp was mentioned earlier by Tim. They're building new homes that are cyclone-proof, fire-proof, and flood-proof to kind of help people to kind of do good in terms of them not having to rebuild every time there's a flood or a cyclone, and it makes sense for them to do that sort of stuff. But my question is quite simplistic in that we need to kind of seek out the people who need purpose most of all. And I think this group has a great opportunity to sort of say, how can we practically do that? Where we say, okay, the mining industry really needs to develop a bit more purpose. They're not going to go away, but how can we, and so my question to you, Blair, is do you have any examples of that? Can we as a group, or how can we as a group find the people who need purpose, desperately need purpose, and help, and then us going there and helping them to uncover purpose? So not in an antagonistic way, but to sort of say, hey, we're here to help you to uncover what could be a really good thing that you could do.
Murdoch Media. Let's all go to them and say, yeah, you really got to shake things up. Hey, we're here to help. That's a joke. But there's a guy called Richard Bullock I have worked with for a very long time. Started at the body shop in, what year was that? No, I don't even want to say how long ago it was. He's a human rights activist, now he works in mining. So he works specifically on mining companies who actually want to change the way they mine, and very different thinking. And there is huge interest in Richard and his thinking and work. He's moved into one of the big four consultancies now, which makes him accessible to maybe the unexpected mining companies who wouldn't hear about his work otherwise. It's spelled, I'll just type it into the chat. He looks at what is sustainable mining and what do you have to put in place. And yeah, that's an example where I know that someone like just exactly what you're talking about. Peter said, this is a sector that needs my help, and he went in and has made it his career. No doubt a lot of people would have given him a very hard time in the beginning for working with some of the worst mining companies in the world, but how else are you going to bring about the difference that you want and the change you want to see? So all credit to people like Richard for maybe stepping into a sector where he didn't feel very comfortable in the beginning and has had to find ways to communicate and bring the opportunity side to those outfits. And not everybody works with Richard, of course, but those who do, you have to kind of raise your eyebrows and go, well, maybe there's a chance there that they're going to change the way they do things and look at the impact they're having. So that's an example. It's a great idea. I mean, there's a whole, the other kind of crazy thought I have, which brings me back to the end of my talk, which is we should all be marching into Canberra and talking to our elected representatives. Without a doubt, let's not kid ourselves that the election's done and it's all over now. We can all sit back and rest. We need to go in there every time we can, get a chance, and demand a meeting and say, come with your list of things you think we have to have. And as you said, Peter, offer help. Say, how can I help you do this? We need more of this complexity thinking, forward thinking, purpose driven, change, a change in how we do things. Can I help you do it? what can I, I don't want to be a burden to you. I don't want to annoy you and overwhelm you with information, but could we start a network of people on the purpose side that could, take a brief from you and say, like, I think this question of how we push for a carbon market in Australia is live and real to any business that cannot see another way forward without being able to monetize how they make that change. We've been given 100 examples of how we can set it up and do it and call it funny names, maybe hide and pretend it's not actually a carbon market. But why do we have to do that? That's ridiculous. Everybody knows we need it. Businesses are all crying out for it. Even the Australian, what's the main, Business Council of Australia, they're so conservative. When the Business Council of Australia says we need a carbon market, it's time for the country to have a carbon market. So why are politicians saying it can't be done? We can't do it. That's just stupid and not brave enough. So maybe we all need to march to Canberra together and say, how do we help you build the structure in which you can put the idea out without being destroyed? Is it we bring mining companies in first and they say we have to have a carbon market? Or is it, maybe we bring people that are the most unlikely, who have fought the hardest against it in the past, but who now realize that, it's very difficult to commercialize this stuff without a structure, financial structure around it. But that's my crazy thought for the day is let's go be the change in Canberra.
Blair, maybe just to pick up on that, because I know Anthony has strong feelings about this. Anthony, did you want to comment on that as well?
Yeah, sure. Blair, we're actually really good friends with Kevin Rudd, with Greg Rudd, who's Kevin's brother.
Greg Rudd.
Right.
And Greg is connected on both sides of politics.
Right.
And he is an exceptional guy. He cares very deeply about the fate of humanity and the planet. And he's based in Canberra. And he and I caught up last week and began asking some questions. I wonder if we brought a meeting together with some people, either from Canberra and maybe had the meeting in Sydney, because you said, why don't we start a network? The reality is
you have one.
if we look just at who's in the room right here and think about who's in the second degree just of the people in this room, I suspect, I know we have actually a very influential group, and all it takes is a bit of cohesion, a little bit of coordination, a little bit of clarity around the purpose and the values. Tim Collins, do you know anything about getting a group going and setting the values and measures of success?
Don't need to answer that question.
So I guess, Blair, it's an open invitation. Would you potentially be interested in an initial meeting to work out how could we make this bigger?
That'd be great. And look, I'd love to hear, voting, if you will, but what are your two things? I mean, to me, it's media ownership and a carbon market. Those are the two things Australia would make a fundamental difference to this country if we could remove these obstacles, absolutely solid obstacles that are keeping us from jumping on every opportunity as they come along. I don't know. I'm sure others have other things that we should.
And I think it would be really great to keep investigating that as well. And so I know that now that, Blair, that you have said that is something of interest, we're in, that's it, we're family, and it's happening. But I would like to just, while we've got time, to just pass over to a few more questions. So we've got a couple of hands up, but I will pass to Kelly. Kelly, it's really nice of you to join. Are you still on the call? Because you're on mute and the video's off, so I wasn't sure if you were there or not. Did you want to ask your question? It's I think it's really relevant to our conversation here.
Thanks, Blood. Yeah, it's just sort of a 11th hour inclusion. Goes. Thanks, you too, mate. I guess it goes just back to the whole paradigm we're stuck in at the moment, which is, business this, business that, product this, product that. Consumerism is rife. It's pretty much the whole reason why we're in this schmozzle, let alone it's the 7 billion plus people. But do you think there's a possibility that we could shift towards the non-growth model that looks at environmental reparation being valued, services being valued, the spiritual pursuits being valued in a way that we start to dematerialize and look at alternative economies? Because as long as we're in this materialistic sort of paradigm, the growth model will be here to hammer anything we do when it comes to, you know, offsets or carbon markets.
Absolutely, good point. In one of the slides earlier, Kelly, I showed this, finding the solution is the job is probably my inroad to, so investors aren't just putting money in to invest in something and saying, I want a return, that's my job, is making money. They're actually seeing a problem and thinking, I'd like to invest in that potentially over a long period of time, but I also want to be involved in how we structure that. What does that solution search look like? Who do we bring in to find that? Is it a combination of different types of participants and investors? That feels to me like the beginning of a change of thinking, from greed to value. What does the value of my time and my job mean to me, and what does it mean? You know, it's a move. I feel like there's a little shift in people not just wanting to make money and having all kinds of stuff, that they want to actually participate in being useful, contributing, making a difference. Now that's early days, and it's also the luxury of people with money. Completely honest with you. This is also usually happening after I've made my fortune by screwing up an awful lot of things in order to make that money. But I do sense that there's a shift in the way people are thinking about their careers. And I think young people very much are thinking like, I just don't want a job. I want a purpose, and I want it to be fulfilling, and I want it to be meaningful. There's more of a shared economy discussion going on in younger people today who think, I don't have to why do I have to buy everything in my house? Do I need a lawnmower, an iron, you know, a whatever system?
Why did Kelly buy a car? I still don't understand.
So I didn't need one. Exactly.
But, you know, can I share stuff instead of having to shell out all of my salary on products and rent? And, you know, and another little interesting model that looks at maybe potentially a shift. There are companies now setting up, and this was pre-COVID. I'm sure they took a major hit over COVID, but maybe they'll come back. Where young people in particular, who are working digitally and can work anywhere, move around. They don't have a one home. They might go 3 months in Thailand in a group place where there are 20 people living and paying a form of rent, and there's a shared kitchen, but you have your own bit of a space. And you might, after 3 months, decide, yeah, that was fun, I'm ready to go somewhere else now, and I might move to South America, or I might, and that's a different, you're kind of cutting yourself off that idea that I have to buy a house, I have to own a car. You know, it's like I can work anywhere potentially, and I would really like to meet interesting people and live all over the place. So there's the travel flip side of that, the flying, etc. But you know, it's just an example of people starting to think differently about ownership in particular. So there's some hope, I think, in that, but a long way to go. And God, the consumer product stuff is, boy, that's just gut wrenching. If you know, the amount of money wasted and spent on shit we don't need, excuse the expression, but I was just in the store the other day, Coles and Woolies still making stupid little plastic toys. And I watched a kid go in the other day, you know, pulling her mom, I want this Harry Potter, you know, it's like billions of pounds of plastic stuff that is completely useless and is wrecking our planet. It's time to stop. It's not okay, Coles and Woolies. It's not. I'm sorry. It's cute. It's nice. Yeah, it's a nice little thing for a kid. But what you know what you're doing with that is wrong. It's addictive, and you're trying to get people into the store by using kids, and then you're literally, these things will last for 10 minutes and then they're in the trash.
You know, it's Blair. I think what's really interesting here, and Robert, I'll come to you just in a second. I see the hands are going up, but I wanted to just mention two things. One is something that you said, which is right on point, which is around, you know, the next generation of people working, but not only the next generation, our generation and everything between is focusing on, you know, the solution is the job. It is, I think COVID has shifted that in a way that's it. We're never going back. You know, some places, yes, but there's suddenly people have woken up and going, hold on a second, just like you said, I don't need to work, you know, going into the CBD on the train for an hour and a half or driving in, sitting in traffic. I can actually do this 3 or 4 days a week from home with my family in my local community. or even I could be anywhere. And, you know, so Christine, who's on the call, you know, she is in the Philippines, you know, in Palau. And one of the things that we had this morning was a fantastic conversation, because we're face to face. It's just such a lovely thing, talking about how the communities that she's running, you know, the people coming to do these retreats will come, and, you know, there's more and more of a growing population of people going, you know what, we are wanting to make a difference, and they're from all over the world coming to get together, and if they need to, they've got the ability to work anywhere, whether it be on an island or whether it be in an office. So I think this shift around the solution is the job, it was just a fantastic comment, you know, it really resonated, and I see it all the time, even in the largest organizations. Like, you know, I know that you'll have conversations with people like Jan from the group, from BASF, and every time I have a conversation with them, you know, I speak with the guys at Bosch, solution is the key. Yes, they're large business, manufacturing and so forth, but it's about the people who turn up. They want to do something that's meaningful. They want to share it. They want to talk about it. They don't want to be the ones that people say, hey, hold on a second, you're the ones that are ruining the environment. That those chemicals you're pumping into whatever is, you know, is killing our fish stocks. You know, people don't want to have that as a relationship with the companies they work with. They want to have the solutions being part of their work at all different. So I think there's a real shift. There's a real shift in that. Did you want to have a comment on that, or I can pass to Robert?
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. And I know Trinity is on the call as a representative young person. Talk about putting you on the spot, Trinity. But I don't know, you might have something to say about people of your age group and how they think about work differently. Because I think it's fun. My son is 18. I just see him and people around him. They're thinking very differently about what a career means to them. It's not, I'm going to get a high-paying job and slave away for 12 hours a day. And many of them just think about working on projects and project to project, and they piece together what they need to do, but they're not necessarily interested. And this is very, very, you know, of course, there are some who are going to go into banking and want to make a squillion bucks, and, you know, but I don't know. I'd love to hear your thought on whether that's different around you.
Go for it, Trini.
Yeah, hello everyone. Blair, everything you've said so far, especially about young people wanting to make change, that quite literally, it's almost like you took that from my brain and then you blurted it out to everyone here in this crowd. So I completely agree with what you've said about people wanting to be, firstly, more digitally flexible. So moving around to different countries, living in different places. I was just in the US for about a month speaking with people kind of in this climate sector as well. And it was amazing having that opportunity to have digital technology where I can call back home in Melbourne to the team. I was working with some people who were linked to the Google program doing their advertising for the APAC region. And it was amazing to be able to call them while I was in San Fran. And then even though the time zones are a little bit, you know, 3 a.m. to 7 a.m. weird, but we have this technology that lets people connect from other sides of the world, which is completely amazing that we have that. And growing up in this new climate, as what you were saying about working anywhere, and the discussion has really changed around having a purpose and wanting to do something. My background is in advertising and marketing and ideas, which is why there's ideas all around me, because I draw and do that sort of thing. I am a recent graduate at Swinburne University. I'm 22, and having seen the advertising industry and experienced a lot of that, I went straight into the advertising industry when I finished high school. I got my first job working on Coles supermarkets campaigns. And exactly what you were saying about the plastic toys, I was a part of that campaign, unfortunately. And it was great having all this experience to actually learn the inner workings of marketing and advertising, because we literally shape society and the way we market through advertising and communications. It's quite literally like holding up a mirror and a reflection of what we value, because that drives consumerism, which drives profits, of course, because we have to sell and make things sell in a way that people will want to engage with the product. So being in that environment and learning and understanding all these marketing tricks, firstly, it's really evil. And then secondly, it's really amazing though, this human psychology aspect of things, of getting people to do actions. It might be in the supermarket by spending an extra, say, $5 to get that $10 reward or prize or something like that. It's tapping into that human motivation. But what I'm really focusing on is taking that learning and tapping into a way that is actually doing the right thing.
That's it.
So kind of hijacking that reward system in a really positive way. So
brilliant.
Amazing. That's great.
That whole
Thank you.
movement of de-investing, right? Like de-invest from that deep consumerism, like something that Blair touched on, all this, trillions, 40 trillion of de-investing from fossil fuels. But what about the using that human need to, for trinkets and cool things, and the kids are all like, I want one of these. What about shifting that to de-invest from this insane consumerism of just junk?
Yeah. Honestly, as adults as well, or as I'm about to be kind of like in the adult category, we are using marketing tactics, right, to get 7-year-old kids to buy candy bars, chocolate, stuff that's really not good for them. And we are literally doing this to children, and it's very obvious. It's hidden under all that sexiness of advertising and the idea of what advertising is. But at the end of the day, we're actually really manipulating people to do this, and that's something that I completely am not aligned with. And I think that using my design and creativity and all the stuff I've learned so far is what I'm really trying to focus and push, is for us to use that to solve a lot of these climate issues, especially a lot of young people in my generation coming into this world, Gen Z. There's been some reports done by Deloitte and PwC about the climate anxiety and the just general despair that my generation feel about inheriting this earth, as we're seeing roads in China are cracking right now because of the heat, and we've got heat waves and we've got melting ice caps, all this stuff, and it just feels very much out of our grasp. So that's, I think, really important to understand, that we almost feel burnt out already before actually getting into the workforce and tackling these problems. So I think it's really important that when young people come onto the scene, that there's firstly a gateway and a welcome entry for us to come in and saying, hey, join this conversation. As brilliantly as Anthony has invited me to come along and be a part of this conversation and facilitated this connection, I think it's really important we do that for other people as well. So young people in this discussion, couldn't agree more. And I'd love to be the token young person here. So yeah, great.
Well, actually, what's really wonderful is that, and Robert, you've been waiting so patiently, on the other end of the spectrum, where people are at that point where they've had a long career and are now, going, okay, what is the future? I don't know, Robert, if you wanted to comment on this piece as well. I know you've probably got some other questions or comments as well. Did you want to jump in? You're just on mute, so.
Sure, I had just a few comments arising in my mind from Blair's talk. I'll try and quickly raise, and maybe Blair got some comments. I'm just wondering whether on the Murdoch topic, we're giving him too much credit for having analysed the climate issues and come to a determined position. I tend to think it's more about finding a culture war topic that he doesn't believe in or may not believe in, as a way of garnering his lust for political power and influence, and he could drop it as soon as tomorrow. And he just if the political climate was moving in that direction. It's one thing. What's your thoughts on that? I heard it suggested that if not at the moment, but very soon, we're going to have mined enough aluminium and enough steel and so forth that we'll ever need, as long as we can recover it and reuse it at 10% of the original generation cost. So I think plastics is almost getting the same point. So there's a lot of technology available. There's a lot of manpower, particularly in the third world, that we could harness towards regenerating existing product. We're already moving to a lease-back model for everything from our music to our telephones to, and they're suggesting that with electric vehicles that you're going to lease or subscribe to an electric vehicle, you're not going to own it. For many years, the retired community subscribed to holiday rental properties or holiday plans and so forth. So housing could go down that track. You mentioned co-housing, that's getting up as a way of affordability. I think the biggest issue about housing is about feeling secure in your old age. If we can provide through universal income or some means of support that level of feeling of security, there won't be the requirement to get on this treadmill of purchase stuff, own stuff for a short term, and then dispose of it. It'll be a lot more sustainable. Perhaps thinking about sovereignty in the Indigenous way of not owning anything, but co-creation model or a coexistence model rather than an ownership model. And finally, you spoke about Google X. I was horrified when Audrey Zibelman moved from AEMO to Google X, and I thought she's just going to get absorbed by, greed. It's great to hear that they're doing good stuff in your eye.
Yeah. Also, she was in the Australian media recently commenting on the US, Australia kind of work on the supply chain side of renewables. And, I didn't love the idea of let's use it as an opportunity to whack China, but they did use it as an opportunity to whack China after we and the US have, wasted 10 years and China didn't. Now we're giving them a hard time for owning all the supply chain. I think that's hilarious. But anyway, watch that space with Audrey. She may well end up doing some really interesting things. I'm hearing through the grapevine. So I think she'll play a role, and I think she's amazing. And Australia needs about 100 people like her to come back to Australia or get activated in Australia to step up and speak out like she's been doing lately. Just amazing, all your thoughts, thinking ahead to that post-consumer kind of approach. And I just thought I'd mention one, Danny Kennedy just did a story for us this week. And at the end, he talks about we have to build in the recycling aspect of renewables right now. Let's not do what we've done in a million other industries where we've no plan for where it goes after we use it, plastics, for instance. So his argument is there's money to be made. So if we can close that loop and solve that problem early on, and people see it as an opportunity, for a whole work structure purpose industry, imagine if we came with a ready-made solution for reusing and recycling all the bits of the solar panels, et cetera. So it's a really good case in point. I think aged care post-COVID, perfect example of why we do have to think differently about housing and the way people live, and that if you're lucky, you can afford to buy a house. If you're not, you rent. The lack of justice and all of this, and how people at need end up in the worst possible vulnerable situation. None of us want to end up in that position, and it's a driver for sure as we all get older to think about what would we want to, where would we find ourselves best? What would we like to be? And it can't deny it would be like with people and love around you, and care available, as opposed to locked away in some place that's you can't see people and the care is questionable and it may not be monitored, etc. It's kind of appalling. So, but I think it's a driver. It's a real driver for a change in that thinking. And universal income, well, that's the first way that you could do away with the consumer economy. Is sorry, nobody gets to be a squillionaire anymore. You get taxed at such a rate, and we have provided universal income for people, and it does start to change your thinking about how much stuff you need, and how many houses you have to own, and that somehow we've got to crack and break that. And maybe that's a way to think about that, is what do people need to live on, and defining that as a first point, and then beginning to think about providing it to people, and not using it as a judgment of whether you're good enough job-wise to earn $1 million, or you're a loser because you can't fit into society's idea of what is success. And it's a big question, but an important one, I think.
And one of those things that I think, especially that one, is very nervous from those who've come from, either communist or post-communist countries. That it's seen the destruction, and part of that holds a lot of people back. So maybe even part of that is, how do you shift the conversation to be one of future, as opposed to, because there still needs to be that inspiration for people to make a difference, but to also to grow. And I think it's so inherent that it's a really interesting situation, isn't it? I was going to just say that we just being mindful of time. We didn't do another breakout because this conversation is absolutely awesome. And it's absolutely perfect. We'll do one more question. So Jan was the next one who had his hand up. Sorry, Murray, but we can always keep talking a bit later on, those who want to stay. But it's always important for me and the team to give people the chance to wrap up when they're expecting to wrap up. And interestingly, we have had probably around 30 people come through today at different times and join and listen. And we're really lucky to have Kelly join, and I saw Warwick Peel joined and dropped off. Also, people doing incredible things. Before we jump to the next question, it'll be the last question, Jan. I do want to mention that comment around, we look at the solutions, but we must build in the circularity or the repurposing or the reuse of that. And when you get a chance, and maybe if James McGregor, if you're still on, because I'm on my mobile, I can't see everyone, if you can maybe drop something into the chat, if you have anything around the solar Second Life program or the work that you're doing, I think it would be it's just so on point. James has been doing extraordinary work, receiving government support and industry support, taking the solar and having the Second Life. So if that's not a problem, James, I'd love to open it up, but we're sort of running out of time. But if you would share that, I think people would be very interested in that. It's really topical. So Jan, last question for the day, and then we will give people a chance to wrap up, and then we can always keep open and keep talking. But yeah, go for it, mate.
Cheers. It's as much an observation as it is a question, and certainly not just a question to Blair, but to everyone in the group, because I've been following the conversation with great interest, thinking, okay, well, where to next? Where to from here with people involved? And the mindset shift that we talked about right at the start of today, I think it's so critically important. And whether it's the newspapers helping media get the messaging right and get the engagement from the people, or whether it's the understanding across all the generations that it was much easier for humanity to get ourselves into this problem that we have than it will be simple to get ourselves out of this situation again, defining circularity and cleaning up oceans and air and so forth. So the question I really have for someone like Blair, with such an incredible level of exposure to so many smart people around the globe, is how do you go about mindset shift towards what we're striving for in this community? And of course, we need more people involved, but how would you go about this? Thanks for that.
Great question, Jan. Blair?
Blair's on mute.
Oh, Blair, you're on mute.
Sorry about that. I had someone in the room. So is the question how to encourage others to make that mind shift?
Yeah. We have so many people who currently are probably feeling stuck in jobs where they're doing things that are not great for the planet. And there are things there, decisions being made, but clearly they're not great for the planet. So how do we shift the minds of people, right, at a large scale? Because media doesn't do it, politicians don't do it. A lot of people have motives that are not to the best of the planet. How do we shift at scale?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think there are a couple of different things. One is, and obviously this is not for those who don't have children or grandchildren, but that's the big one that hits most people is, what are we leaving for our kids and our grandkids? How much are we trashing this planet? And what are we, how can you live with yourself knowing that you have done nothing to try and remedy the fact that we're turning the next generation over to what will be a horrific, potentially, environment to live in? The heat, the extreme weather, the threats to food and water security. That for me is probably one that when I talk to people about why they changed their mindset, why they got activated to do something, it's often that. Bill McKibben has started a group in the US called Third Act that is just about motivating people over 65 to get active. They are people with money, often influence, networks, careers, experience, and often time. So it's a good idea to think about how to activate those people. Also a purpose, it gives them things they can do, that they can feel very involved in and grateful for participating in. I guess the other one that I talked about in the start was the excitement factor of this moment in time. If you want to have an impact, this is the time to be alive, because you can really make a difference by getting involved in helping to solve some of those problems that we're facing. So for some people, it would be I guess it's both carrot and stick. There's the negatives of what we're doing and the impact, and the plus side of how much fun it can be to be part of something and bring about a real change, at whatever scale that might be, whether you're doing it as a group or you're doing it in a community, or supporting an organization like Fire Sticks, or whether it's your primary job. Doesn't really matter if you're part of something that's doing really good stuff, whether you're doing it as a volunteer or it's a paid job. Lots of different ways to go about this. So I think those are my two suggestions. The other thing I learned at 350 was having a scale of solutions for people. Some people will only do little bits of stuff. Others will go on a journey that ends up at getting arrested at a coal plant. There's a scale that people will go to, and understanding that's okay that wherever you are on that scale, just because you're never going to lock yourself onto a coal plant doesn't mean you can't be really effective in your community working on a composting project or whatever it is. So I think it's maybe giving people license to say wherever you're coming at it, it's really important and it's part of the bigger picture solution. So good on you for whatever you're doing. Just don't do nothing. And that when you give people ideas about where they might come in on that scale, one thing we always try to do is have, for any campaign, we'd have 5 things, easy to hard, and put them all out and say, pick where this fits you, and that's all good. And then realizing, I guess, that the shared experience of being involved in something like that with other people is really satisfying. I guess that's my take, but open to many other ideas. I'm sure others have great ideas about how to do that.
I'd just love to add one other thing, is that something that we keep saying as we develop, projects, is that doesn't make sense. The question of, like, does this really make sense? Like, if we take this process and solve one problem, is that okay that there's a downstream issue? Like sometimes there's these, it's having that, just taking a step back and going with, does this really fit? Does this really make sense what we're saying we're doing? And hence why, that greenwashing, piece that hasn't really lasted that long. People are calling it out everywhere because people step back and go, but that doesn't make sense. And I think that's something that, we as individuals should always, I think, bring into the mix too, I would say.
Blair, I heard you say don't do nothing. I don't know if it was your campaign. If it was, big congratulations to you. One of my favorite sayings ever, I actually saw on the t-shirt of a crew of people at the body shop. And what it said was, bad things happen when good people do nothing. And over the years, I've learned to frame things more in the positive. So I've changed that in my own mind to say brilliant things happen when good people do something.
It's great and true.
That's so true.
I wonder what's possible as we coordinate and get together and become more and more organized and do something.
So maybe as we bring the session to a natural close, I think we're right on time with a minute. That's amazing. Everybody knows that, if I'm not running 10 minutes late, something's not right, but I've tried my hardest, Blair. We will be in Sydney. I think we will have that session in Sydney, and I think we'll have that invitation to the community to come together. We've got our next session, Maurice has just posted on the 26th of August. That'll be online. Who knows? Maybe we may be coming from Sydney. So it would be wonderful to have an in-person and digital session. I think that would be absolutely amazing. So thanks, Tim. There's got a drop. So thank you to everyone who's joined, and Blair, it's been absolutely incredible. We will share the video with the community because I think there's just so much to process. I can't wait to sort of go back over and have a look at some of those comments and the questions that we ask ourselves, especially around, that BAU is just not going to solve our problems. I love that. Thank you so much for saying that. and there we'll also share the comments. There's been a lot of comments and links in the chat, probably a lot more than people will be able to keep across of with the fantastic conversations. So we will do that. And, you know, I just want to thank Maurice for really just making sure that we had a great session. All the technology ran, everybody was able to communicate. Anyone that didn't have a chance to raise their questions, you know, we've got the communications. Please feel free, share, connect, LinkedIn. And again, if we can do a big, you know, silent clap or thank you to Blair for joining. We really appreciate you leading our discussion today. It was absolutely
It's a great pleasure. Thank you. And really amazing to talk to you all. Great ideas, good thinking. You really realize when you get started down this track of thinking ahead, how many incredible people there are who've really spent a lot of time thinking about how we approach some of this stuff. And it's inspiring. And together, I think we can come up with a lot to do and really, you know, feel like we're doing it collectively, which is, I think, much more exciting, more fun, and a real treat. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Blair. And please, everyone, connect, make projects happen, just go for it, you know. And Trinity, thank you so much, you know, for really just stepping up and talking through that. I think your view was really appreciated and necessary in this conversation. So thank you so much. All right, those who need to go, all the best. We'll keep